I have three further speakers indicating Senator Niall, Senator Francis Black and Deputy Mick Wallace, who has had to go over to engage with the Minister for Transport. So, Niall O'Donnell, please.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you to all of our witnesses this morning. It's been a very useful exchange, I have to say, and certainly rings true as to why it was important we did this and had this pre-legislative scrutiny. But in terms of what Frank said earlier really struck me in terms of the role of carers and how we identify carers and what care actually is. That takes many different forms and many different guises, and of course I'm similarly of a view that the sexist nature of what has prevailed needs to go and needs to change. I'm just thinking in terms of the symbolic recognition of care and carers and how important that is. It is complex if we want to do it justice, I believe, because not only do we have the competing, I suppose, views around women and men and gender neutrality, but we also have an increasing number of carers who are children. Elderly people who are caring for maybe disabled children, or people with specific needs and requirements. So a lot of carers will face, as of course, feelings of isolation, feelings of marginalisation, and I think symbolism can address that to some point. But in terms of their daily bread and butter, it comes down to then the legislative flow that may be required, because if you were to make the argument around access and benefits and how we support tangibly carers, if children can't open bank accounts, for example, or all of the necessary requirement around that, it is a complex issue. So I appreciate I haven't formulated even all of this in my own head, yet that is just something separate that struck me from the conversation and the questions that have happened thus far. So I suppose really to try and put that into the form of a question, Chair, really it is, are you aware of any other examples of good practice, any other areas internationally where states have even included the symbolic nature of care and a constitutional recognition of care? And care doesn't always actually maintain or prevail within the family. We probably all know of instances where there is community care, where neighbours and people look after maybe more vulnerable people within their community. So that constitutional recognition of solidarity and support and care, I think, is very important. So while there are international examples, Chair, of that symbolic nature, but if there are also international examples where states and countries have gone beyond that, and I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Logan, would you like to take that? And
looking to my expert colleague here, Professor Mullally, who might have a better role.
Thank you very much, Senator and Chair. There are a number of other examples where you can point to constitutional texts and also to case law from constitutional courts where there is much more extensive recognition given to socio-economic rights more broadly than has been given in Ireland, either by the courts or in the constitutional text at the moment. I'm not aware of any specific example where there's a reference to the role of carers as such, but then again Article 41.2 already has that in our constitutional text, so we have a precedent there, albeit in a very stereotypical and discriminatory way, but it provides a starting point then, as we have argued, to expand that, to remove the discriminatory element and actually to ground what is behind that, which is to recognise the value of care and caring work in the context of family life. So that's what we're trying to build on, and in doing that, drawing on the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or recently ratified the CRPD, obviously gives another context to that as well. So those are the kind of international human rights obligations, as well as obligations with regard to social security and caring more broadly that can ground that. I think the specific details are a matter for the legislature, as is currently the case in regards to payments around disability, in regards to support for childcare and the work of carers and policy on that. And those details will continue to be the role and responsibility of the legislature. But the idea is that you provide a constitutional framework within which those decisions are taking place.
For that, specifically knowledge of other international best practice.
We're not aware of any other constitutions that do it. That's not to say they don't, just not aware of it. But I do think on the legislation, I mean, I did mention the UK Care Act, which is more maybe comprehensive. I think one of the issues here is that so many of pieces of legislation and also policy, it's been very piecemeal in Ireland. So, yeah, we don't have examples like that where things are done in that comprehensive way in terms of the legislation, and I think that's one of the things that would need to be considered. But I also think within that, and I mean, we saw that from the Assembly on the 8th, where international experts were brought in terms of what good models of practice were there, and I think that would be really useful.
The School of Law at Limerick University is going to shed light on something.
Well, I'm not aware of any other constitution which includes a reference to care, but as the others have said, there are certainly lots of examples from other jurisdictions where care has been looked at in a statutory context.
Okay.
I suppose very briefly, Chair, in terms of supplementary, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so that's important to say. It's an important health warning in relation to this. But where Jim was kind of alluding to the fact that, you know, if there was this insertion or a replacement in the Constitution, that you may be opening yourself to legal tests in terms of the role of carers. I suppose for me is what we kind of probably have to try and land on is a definition of care. You know, because the nature of caring and carers is very different. It's certainly different from, you know, when this article would have first appeared in the Constitution. So I think in terms of, not even, it's the wrong term, not even from guarding against that, because, you know, why not put that to the test would be my view in terms of the legal outworkings of it. But if we're going to define constitutionally care, I think politically, societally, culturally, we need to have a clear definition and clear understanding of what caring actually is and who carers actually are. And I think it's important that is a very fundamental starting point as we move forward. Okay, Gareth.
Thank you for that, Senator.